HDMI cable. So comes in a box like you see here. Then you can cut it open. It's the frustration-free packaging, and inside is just, of course, the cable itself. Now, what you have here is a very nice thin micro HDMI cable to a standard HDMI connection. Now, this one supports Ethernet, and it'll tell you high speed with Ethernet right here as well on the end of the connector. But it also supports 3D and audio return, so that if you have a device that needs to talk back to a receiver, that you don't have to have yet separate audio cables like an optical or a coaxial audio cable. Construction-wise, I think it's good. Now, it's going to be thin, and that's for the purpose of it. It is a micro HDMI cable, so you expect a thinner cable, not a big hunking cable like something that you have there. That is actually a similar specs to this one here. But if you're going to have a little old port that's like your little connector here, this is a micro HDMI connector. You of course expect the cable not to be this big hunkin' cable hanging off your tablet or something like that. So this makes sense, of course. But it's nice connectors. They seem fairly well put together for my book. The HDMI connection is very standard on this end here compared to any of the other Amazon Basics cables. They always seem quite nice. Now, it will come with the specs. Again, it'll stay right on this side with Ethernet, but it doesn't actually say anywhere else of note that I can tell that it has the other features other than it said it on the box. Now, take note, it is a micro HDMI cable. That's the small little connector here, not a mini HDMI cable that you see here. So here is your standard HDMI connection that you see right there. Just your standard HDMI. Then they came up with mini HDMI. So take a look at the size of that. It's a little flatter, smaller, and now they have micro HDMI. So make sure you're definitely getting the right cable. Let's overlay them here so you can kind of see the size difference between them. So obviously there is a notable size difference. Just make sure you're getting the right one. For example, I have a Sony camcorder here. If I open it up, you'll see that this one takes a mini HDMI out, not a micro HDMI out. So definitely make sure you're getting the right one for your device. Now let's compare this to some other cables that we have out here. So we talked about the construction. It's thin, but again, you expect it to be thin because it needs to be due to the micro connection. The mini that I had sitting next to it, now remember they all vary in thicknesses anyways, and can sometimes just literally be the plastic. But you'll notice that this cable is going to be thinner than my mini. So on the right I have a mini, on the left here I have my micro. You'll notice the size differences there. Now let's actually compare this guy to a typical Amazon Basics normal HDMI cable. So here this one is just going to be my standard HDMI with Ethernet. This actually doesn't even have 3D or audio return on it. And we can kind of get the difference in the size. Now remember, the HDMI connector itself was the same, but notice the size difference in the cable itself. And of course, let's take a look at one more thing. Now this guy here, this big old hunkin' cable, it's lengthy, so that's one thing why it's mass. But this is also a HDMI current spec that is a similar spec to this cable, except that it is a normal HDMI on both ends. This had the audio return in 3D and all of that, but holy cow. I mean, look at the thickness difference between these two, right? On the right is a equivalent spec, other than it can run a much longer length, and on the left is the micro cable. In summary, I think it's a quite competent cable, right? It's a digital cable, so either the signal makes it or it doesn't, but there's going to be varying levels of shielding depending on which cables you have out there. For the short distance that this is, and for what it's intending to connect to with this tiny micro adapter, so little camcorders and tablets and things like that, I think it does a good job. I would prefer to connect my TV with my standard cables, of course, like that, but I'm happy with my Amazon Basics version of this. The biggest caveat out there is just whether you picked the right cable. Just again, the micro versus the mini here versus the regular. Thanks for watching the review. Hello, this is a review of the Amazon Basics micro HDMI cable. So comes in a box like you see here. Then you can cut it open. It's the frustration-free packaging, and inside is just, of course, the cable itself. Now, what you have here is a very nice thin micro HDMI cable to a standard HDMI connection. Now, this one supports Ethernet, and it'll tell you high speed with Ethernet right here.